The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. Read by Mr. Multiverse. True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then I am mad? Hearken, and observe how healthily and calmly I could tell you this whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain. But once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object, there was none. Passion, there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me an insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, that was it. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so, by the degrees, very gradually, mind you, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now, at this point, you fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it. Oh, so gently! And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, and put a dark lantern, all closed so no light could be shown out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved in slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Would a madman have been so wise as this, I ask you? And then, when my head was well in that room, I undid the lantern cautiously, oh so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray of light fell upon the vulture's eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight. But I found the eye was always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me, it was his evil eye. And every morning, when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone and inquiring how he had passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed, to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than mine ever did. Never before that night I had felt the extent of my own powers, of my saganicity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph to think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he had not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he had moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch, as thick darkness, for the shutters were closed, fastened through the fear of robbers. And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it steadier and steadier. I had my head in, and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the thin fastening, and the old man sprang out of bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in bed listening, just as I have done night after night, hearkening to the death watchers in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not of a groan of pain or of grief. Oh, no! It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew that sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up in my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise. When he had turned in the bed, his fears had been ever so since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them careless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only the mouse crossing the floor, or it's merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these superstitions. But all he had found was all in vain. All in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him, and enveloped the victim. It was in a mournful influence of unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he had neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within that room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until a length of a single dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot from the old crevice and fell upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness. All of the dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled me to the very marrow of my bones, but I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had been distracted by the ray, as if by instinct, precisely upon that damned spot. And now, have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but an over-acuteness of the sense? Now, I say there came to my ears as a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes an enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of the drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held onto the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every minute. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous, and so I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that house, so straight a noise as this excited me to an uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leapt into the room. He shrieked once, only once. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. And then I smiled. Oh, how I smiled to find the deed so far done. But for many a minute the heart beats on in the muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. it would not be heard through the wall. And at length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there for many a minute. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead, and the eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you will no longer so think when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. For all I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head, and the arms, and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the floor of the chamber, and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing wrong to wash out. No stain of any kind, no blood sport, whatever. I had been too wary of that. The tub had caught it all. When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock. Still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart. For what now did I have to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with perfect civility as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicions of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged to the police office. And they, the officers I mean, had been sent to search the premise. I smiled. For what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was of me of my own dreams. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took the visitors all over the house. I bade them search, and search well. I led them. At length, in fact, to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath the response of the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things, but ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and still chattered. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of them of the feeling, but it continued and gained definitiveness, until at length I found that noise, and it was not within my ears. No doubt I had grown very pale, but I talked more fluently, yes, and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a dull, quick sound, much the sound as a watch makes, enveloped in cotton. And I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about the trifles in a high key with a violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor, to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men. But the noise steadily increased. Oh, God! What could I do? I foamed. I raved. I swore. I swung a chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards. But the noise arose over all. The continually increased. It grew louder. Louder! And still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possibly they heard not? Almighty God, no, they heard. They suspected. They knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I still think. But the agony was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this delirium. I could bear this hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt I must scream or die, and now again. Hark, louder, louder, and louder, and louder! Villains, I shrieked! Disassemble no more! I did the deed! Tear up the planks! Here is the beating of his hideous heart!